Welcome back, everyone. We're going to have much more of a dialogue here, and the speakers will be free to stand and address answers as they're specifically put to us, and you may put answers that might even be answered by other people, questions that might be even answered by other people in the room. So it's very much about dialogue, and we've had some terrific opening thoughts from the speakers just now. So let the proceedings continue. So taking first bids, first question, quick on the move, please. Introduce yourself after the microphone lands in your hands, or feel free if you do want to come forward and stand here near either of the microphone stands, then we'll certainly know you're ready, but please.
Thank you. My name's Felicity Prentice. I'm currently lurking at RMIT, which is the University in Melbourne, but I'm also a primary and secondary and TAFE and workplace teacher, so I think I'm across the spectrum. And I have a question for all of you, which is, and I'm going to have to do an illustration here. I'm hearing about the 4-year-olds and their creativity. I've got 5 children, so I've actually got a data set at home. And it strikes me that their creativity is right up here, you know. Now, I'm also hearing about the grad students, the self-selectors, and they're right up here. It strikes me that the educational system that I've worked in does this. You start there in primary school, you dip down to the year 12, which is the VCE, our A-levels, where you're absolutely force-fed and any sign of creativity is beaten out of you. And then you start up again until you get to the grad level. Now, my question is, we're starting here, that's a rare end of the curve. We're not going to really be able to see a lot of that. What can we do to address the dip, which I think, having taught in secondary, it's horrifying. You go from these wonderful collaborative student-centred classrooms to content-based. This is where we're losing them, and we're only picking up a few on the other end. So
thank you, Felicity.
What can we do for that?
Good question. I'm scared to ask what happens after that, but we'll just stick with this dip, please, Steve.
Oh gosh, Felicity. I mean, it's worse than you described, really, because in that catastrophic collapse, there are very few left who are then still on track. So that rarefied group of exceptional doctoral students are drawn from such a tiny number that you just know if we'd drawn it from a broader base that we would have more and smarter students even than we've got. I ran a project for 10 years of taking children who'd been excluded from school, mostly by behaviour, sometimes by circumstance. So they've been expelled, you know. And it was really interesting working with them. Mostly, they'd become derailed by the process. It was a moment of profound humiliation, usually, for them. It was a moment when sometimes it was bullying, sometimes it was sarcasm, sometimes it was an inadequacy, you know. And, I think the system had expected them to run along such a narrow corridor that they'd wanted to pause and peep through a few doorways, and that had been hopelessly inappropriate. I think the system really, really does punish people for not doing it the right way. And I think a lot of you here, a lot of people in general will have had scarring experiences on their way through school as a result of all that. And something like 50% of people have a pretty torrid time at school. So, it's not just the loss of talent that we're getting. It's we were chatting over dinner last night about bullying, and people were carrying the scars of bullying 40 years later. Quite extraordinary, really. So, it's all pretty important stuff. But it's not rocket science to change it. That's the thing. I mean, you change it by keeping it fresh. You change it by listening to the learner's voice is key to all this. You can't rebuild education for students. You can rebuild it with them, and that's absolutely key. And their insights into what works and what doesn't work are powerful. We have the UK has heaps of problems at the moment. One of the things we got right is it's quite hard to be appointed as a teacher now without being interviewed by a children's panel. And 75% of schools would do that, and the kids ask very pertinent questions and have a view. Most of the schools I'm working with, the children will do formal lesson observations. They'll sit at the back of class and watch the teacher teach and feed back to them, and indeed to the learners, how they might have done it better. And they see stuff that is really pretty smart.
I think it's a really great question. It's the, I think it's in the book, Orbiting the Giant Hairball. If you ask a group of first graders who are artists, everyone raises their hand. And then you ask the same group by the time they hit the 6th grade, and only one kid raises their hand. So
and the others laugh. You know,
did the other kids move to a different district? Did the other artists move? But no, it's been beaten out of them. I think there's something also with enlightening the parents too, to be asking for the fuzzier type of classes, the art and the music and the other things. Because if you first time you've had a kid in school, you're thinking, geez, they should be writing, reading, arithmetic, and they're not really pushing as much as they should in helping educators like get funds and budgets for those type of classes.
Thank you, Brendan. Does anyone else want to make a comment about how to generate or stop that decline of innovation in the centre?
Thanks. My name is Fiona. My background's in media and publishing. I used to work for one of those trashy UK newspaper organisations that Stephen was referring to earlier. But I
didn't say trashy.
Well, no, I totally understand. But more recently I wrote a book about play in the early years of childhood, just literally just so inspired by my own 4-year-olds. And I really feel that they're just that transition to school even, that so much of the knowledge that the educators in the early years, whether it be parents or child carers, preschool teachers, whatever, is just not being transferred to the schools. And you know, I'm always fascinated by people who've actually found their passion, and so often they refer to something they were doing or something they were observing when they were 5, whether it be a conductor or some engineer watching their grandfather make watches, or something like that, or artists. I just feel there's just so much knowledge, and yet when you get to school, no one asks you about your child. You don't even get that question. You're not even given the courtesy as a parent of what your child is like, and yet you've spent 5 years pretty much educating. Well, for many of us, educating them on your own, or and I just feel that even at that beginning stage, the knowledge is that there's the dip happening straight away because there is no transition. It's almost disregarded.
No transference of knowledge.
And of course, the pay that people are getting in that sector is an indication of that as well. That they're just so.
Thank you.
I just feel at that very first step, so much more could be done.
Good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Adrienne, you had a comment about that?
Yes. Well, I've not had direct experience, but I've been reading about the classrooms in China, and also the classrooms in an experimental area in California, where basically what they do is put a teacher, so say a Chinese teacher is teaching so many classes a week, say the 25 hours. Well, 15 of those hours they will have 2 other teachers in the room who will peer review and comment and say, you missed out on so-and-so, you didn't notice that she was doing that. And so you have constant feedback, and it's not a putting down feedback, it's an enhancing feedback. And what I read about the schools in California was very similar, where they are having a constant sort of peer review, but even to the point of picking out the best teachers in maths and videoing their classes, putting them on the web, and letting people see how to teach a really inspirational class in maths. And I think we've got to learn from each other. The other thing that seemed to be quite clear from Finland was that the teachers there have a very high social status. So that it is one of the best things to be, is a teacher, and there are more career options for advancement by staying in the classroom if you're a good teacher, rather than going into administration. So, for instance, you can get more pay by being a demonstration teacher or by being a teacher. So it seems to me that that's some of the areas. Now, I know at La Trobe we're really focusing in education. We're going to start focusing on preparing science and maths teachers for really teaching, because we're slipping. And, science and maths is a critical part of every new citizen's armamentarium of skills. So they can't all be scientists, but they've all got to actually understand something about the world that we live in. And I think it's very, very important. So we've got to somehow change the teaching profession and their reward system, and their status. So that was my comment.
We'll get accolades of agreement.
And it is pretty interesting, though, Peter, that when you look at most faculties of education, and when you look at them, you look around Australia at the front-running schools, and there are heaps. You know, you've got collaborative learning, you've got big agile spaces, you've got people playing with immersion, playing with the time. You know, you've got some really innovative teaching, but almost none of that maps into the education faculties, where they're still doing seminar, lecture, essay. And just quite extraordinary that they haven't taken their own medicine. I can't think of another subject where, you know, where that's been the case. And Fiona's key point here, I think, is about that symmetry. You know, that you do absolutely learn. I used to work with a girl whose son got a report that came home, and it had he had a D and a quite sniffy comment about his PE capability, which included shows no aptitude for sport. So she went in and said, well, that's a curious comment because you know he's in the England diving squad. And you know he's in the squad because you wrote to the paper to say that he was there. And the teacher said, and I quote, yes, but we don't do diving here. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful moment of that lack of symmetry. I mean, that's as bad as it is. You know.